Welcome to Sparks of History, where world history and Jewish history meet. Today we are very pleased and extremely honored to have with us Rabbi Dr. Aharon Rakeffet. Rabbi Rakeffet is professor of rabbinic literature at Yeshiva University's Carolyn and Joseph S. Gruss Institute in Jerusalem, Yerushalayim. Rabbi Rakeffet is an internationally acclaimed scholar, speaker, and author. He is a pioneer in Jewish education, having taught thousands on thousands of devoted students over his illustrious career. Rabbi Rakeffet's works include Bernard Revel, builder of American Jewish Orthodoxy, the Silver Era, Rabbi Eliezer Silver and his generation, the Rev, the world of Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, as well as Washington Avenue to Washington Street. And today we will be talking about a fascinating topic, the relationship between two of the seminal Jewish figures of the 20th century, Rabbi Aharon Kotler and Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, the Rav. Rabbi Rakeffet is eminently positioned to present insights into this topic as he studied under both of these Torah giants. Just very briefly, Rabbi Rakeffet, again, thank you very much for being with us today. We appreciate it very much. America, when Rabbi Kotler arrives, his arrival and what were his early years like?
Rabbi Aharon Kotler, the question is, well, how did he arrive? The Vad Hatzalah, which was established in the late 30s by Rabbi Eliezer Silva, tried desperately to bring over Rabbanim. They finally got permission to bring over a few that did not have the necessary qualifications, the non-immigrant visa status, etc. And there was a whole dialogue and debate who to bring over. And they decided, above all, to bring Rabbi Aharon Kotler. Why did they decide to bring Rabbi Aharon Kotler? And this is very fascinating. He was not that well known yet. He was Kletzker Yeshiva. He was essentially 1892. He was born. We're talking 1940. He was not that old. He wasn't hadn't published Svarim, etc. But they reached the conclusion that to bring over one of the world famous Gaonim, Svarim, these people were in their 70s and 80s, and there's a limit to their energy. And Rabbi Aharon was a bren. I said it in Yiddish, I don't know how to translate it. It was a burning fire. And they brought Rabbi Aharon to America. Rabbi Aharon arrived in 1941. His initial years in America were totally devoted to Hatzalah work. He wanted to save as much as he could, obviously. And he knew the Matzah better than anyone. Rabbi Eliezer Silva and the others who were so active in Hatzalah deferred to Rabbi Aharon. By 1943, there was no way to save anyone, basically. And at that point, Rabbi Aharon came back to his role as a Rosh Yeshiva. Now, the story is fascinating. There were Gedolim who were arriving in America. Reb Mendel Zaks. Reb Mendel Zaks was Radna Rosh Yeshiva. Reb Shmuel Belkin, the second president of YU, studied under him in Radna. He was Reb Shmuel Belkin's Rebbe. And everyone knew about Reb Mendel Zaks, son-in-law of the Chafetz Chaim. And Rabbi Revel saved Reb Mendel Zaks, among others. He invited him to teach at the yeshiva, and that enabled him to get an unquoted immigrant visa, and he came to the United States. He was not anxious to go into what became YU, was not just YU, was yeshiva and yeshiva college. And he started a kollel for Kudshim, basically, in Mount Vernon. And the idea was that we now had some Americans, mainly from Yeshivat Chafetz Chaim, perhaps from Torah V'das, and there the refugees who were coming in. So the kollel began. The kollel did not take off. And Rabbi Aharon took that base and spoke on the east side in the shul. I know people who were there, and it changed their whole lives. American youngsters, and Rabbi Aharon wanted to find a place away from the crowd, away from the big city, away from colleges, actually. and he chose Lakewood. There was another reason he chose Lakewood, because Lakewood at that time was what Florida is today. You didn't fly down to Lakewood, you took a bus. At that point, buses were more popular than planes. And it was a good resort town during the winter, and therefore there were a number of kosher hotels, and you had a source of income, you could raise money. So Rabbi Aharon chose Lakewood, and he began with about 13 students.
And what year are we talking about now? This is what year?
1943.
Okay.
And those were the early years. Now, when you talk about Rabbi Aharon and more than Lakewood, it was very simple. Rabbi Aharon was, as I said a few moments ago, a Bren, and he wasn't just satisfied with Lakewood. He put Agudat Yisrael on the map in America. Until World War II, every Rav in America was a Mizrahiite, was a Zionist. The only Agudist in America was a Rav out in Nebraska who was Machshir, the Schlachthäusers, the slaughterhouses there. His name was Rav Grushinsky. He was a cousin to Rav Chaim Oizer. He, Kaka, was an Agudist. He later retired to Brooklyn, and I met people who told me he knew every Tosfos and Shas by heart. He was a Yid of London. He was an Agudist. After World War II, as you know, very few Mizrahiites are left in the United States. Anyone who was a Mizrahiite basically went in Aliyah, my entire generation, which produced Gedolei Yisrael. The greatest among them lived or died in Eretz Yisrael. And Rabbi Aharon is the one. Chinuch Atzmai, he became the big patron for Chinuch Atzmai. And that was a second part of Rabbi Aharon. He was not just Rosh Yeshiva of Lakewood, he was an activist on the rabbinic political scene. He got involved with the Agudas HaRabbanim. And ultimately, as you know, the Union of Orthodox Rabbis, by the 1950s, it shifted gears, the mid-50s, instead of practicing rabbis being elected to the presidium, you had Rosh Yeshiva. The only holdovers from the old era were Rabbi Eliezer Silva, because everyone had tremendous derech eretz for him, and he had Kotler in him. He was a tremendous lamdan, and Rabbi Teitz of Elizabeth. He was a non-Rosh Yeshiva, but he was a man of great ability, great achievements, and knew the American scene backwards and forwards. So they were the two holdovers. But later, you talk about the Presidium, you talk Rabbi Aharon Kotler's activities, you talk about Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Baruch Hashem Lo Alman Yisrael. Now, Lakewood at that time, it was a very unique experience. And here I have to tell you, I have a tremendous advantage over my students. And by the way, this coming Sunday, I start my 63rd year of teaching Torah. But now it's in a way I could never dream. I only cry that the Rav couldn't teach like this, because I'll be teaching with at least 3 to 4 continents listening, all over Israel, the United States, England, and South Africa. And the American continent, this is 2 years, I plead with them, don't stay up all night. It's 2 a.m. in New York when I begin, 1 a.m. in Chicago. And my Talmudim tell me, more important, the Shmiya is not as important as the Re'iyah. And they quote Chazal with Kriyat Yamsov, and I understand them. I can't argue with them. They put them on the
L'chayo.
Amen. Now, with Rabbi Aharon, Lakewood at that time, and YU at that time, I'll tell you what my advantage was, which you don't have today. It's very simple. I'd walk into YU. On the street, I spoke English. I'm a third-generation American. My parents were born in Holland. My grandparents came to America literally at the turn of the century, 1900. My whole thought process was English. The minute you opened the door to YU or to Lakewood, als es gewinnt Yiddish. It was in a totally different world. And that was a tremendous advantage because here, a kid like myself could push his way forward and talk to Rabbi Aharon Kotler, Klesker. Ich habe geredet mit them in learning. I spoke with them hashkafa. It was a chutzpah kid. You came into YU, the Rebbeim didn't know anything about baseball. But here you're talking to Reb Mendel Zaks, at that point he had joined the YU faculty. Dr. Belkin saved his Rebbe, I'll put it honestly, and gave him panasa. And you talked to the Chaim's son-in-law. I was a little older. I'm sitting right next to the Rav. The Rav couldn't get in or leave without my standing up. There's that famous picture. You can see where I'm sitting. So it was a different experience altogether. Now, Lakewood was even more unique because the heart of the Lakewood crowd, in my time, there were about 100, 110 students at the most. Half of them were survivors, Europeisha. And you could see their relationship to Rabbi Aharon, and you felt kletz. It connected you to the earlier generations. And I have to tell you, it affected a lot of my interest, of course, and my basic, no one gives me credit. I know Shas and Paiskim, etc., Shelet and Shuvit, but everyone says the great historian. All right, true. And you mentioned some of my books. I have a 5th volume, Rakeffet Aharon, that's being prepared now, which has endless material on Torah history. And that's because I was exposed. I was walking in Washington Heights, walking in Lakewood, but I really was in Lithuania, White Russia, Poland. And I can tell you even better, and my students will testify, when I get emotional, I break into Yiddish. I cry in Yiddish, I laugh in Yiddish, and that says something. And in Lakewood, there was Freddie Zucker, a kid from Baltimore, Zichrono Livracha. And I still remember Freddie convincing me that Moshe Rabbeinu spoke Yiddish with the Rebbeinu Shalom. They can't sign Anders. It can't be any different. I'm quoting Freddie.
Mama Lashon.
Yeah, so I have to tell you, that was a tremendous experience. And the mashgiach of Lakewood, Rav Nosson Wachsvogel, who was mashgiach many, many decades, he used to regale me with stories. Again, in the 1920s, there was only one act in town. That was what became YU, which was Yeshiva Shulchan and Yeshiva College. MTA, Yeshiva College, Yeshiva Shulchan. And Nosson Wachsvogel studied there. And he told me when Rabbi Belkin, Dr. Belkin came to America, they learned v'chavruta. What was the trade-off? Reb Shmuel taught him Gemara. He was a Ratner, he was a Nilui. And Reb Nosson taught Reb Shmuel English. He was his first English teacher. So this gives you a feel of what it was like. Now,
let's shift for a second, if we can, to the Rav.
No, 1 second. I'm following.
Okay.
You can relax.
Okay.
If I had my way, I would have remained in Lakewood. I have to be honest. Nafshi Chashira, and my parents, who letting me do what I want, they were and had really no real understanding or knowledge. They just had tremendous Jewish feeling. So I was my own boss. But my mother, my father, those days, women made all the decisions. If father worked, then her mother made the decisions. And she was very upset. I didn't want to go to college. So my mother said, it's a disgrace. She went to college till the Depression knocked her out. My father went to pharmaceutical school till the Depression knocked him out. And you're not going to go to college. So I made a deal with my parents. I would try Yeshiva College for 1 year. And if I don't like it, they agreed I can go back to Lakewood. So in September 1955, my first class in Yeshiva College, a new professor, it's his very first lecture, a man who went on to influence thousands of lectures that I would later give out to Chazek Torah Hashem Tamima, Professor Louis Feldman. And you have no idea, I come into this class, 55, a young kid, 17, wanting to go back to Lakewood. He hands out sheets on the Hammurabi code, the Hittite code. And I say, what's going to be here? Etc. So He gives a lecture on the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. That was something out of the world. At that moment, I became a wider person. And he showed that all the ancient codes reflect the Sheva Mitzvot, except they're more lenient than the Sheva Mitzvot, because he ate Salev Adam, Raminu Rav, what we have today, nothing has changed. All right, then I'm very shortly thereafter, 1954, I heard my first shiur from the Rebbe. It was a Yortzeit shiur, and I understood the halacha perfectly, not the Agada. It's interesting. It took a few more years to appreciate the Agada, who the Rav was, when he left Shas and Paiskim in Bris, which already by the age of 15, 16 was axiomatic for me. Zil Kribe Ravhu. And then I met the Rav, and the Rav, so everyone asks me, what's the difference to Rav Aharon? The truth was, on one level, they were exactly the same. And I'll prove it to you in a second. Litvische Teda, Shas, Paiskim, a Rambam, Vimen Daf Lerinin, a Ravid, a Ra'abad, as we say in Israel, they were exactly the same. How can I prove it? Very simple. In Lakewood, I became very close to Rabbi Aharon's son, Rav Shneur Kotler. I was a ben bayit in his home. And these years, I don't have to give you any other source except these years heard from Rav Shneur. When he came back, after World War II, after he got out, he was in Israel. He studied by Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, his grandfather, in Eitz Chaim. And then he came back to America to help his father. His father, mein Tata, hat mir geschickt, sie bist gekommen, soll ich lernen beim Boston Rav. My father sent me to what you call YU today, and it was YU already, it was after 45, to study with the Rav. And I spoke with Rav Shneur, and was für ein Eindruck hat das gemacht, what an impression. And he told me that the Torah was unbelievable. He said the students, sometimes he felt awkward the way they dressed, the way they come to shiur. All right, had he lived in Israel, he would have become a lot more understanding that one doesn't have to wear a uniform. The godlet of the person is what overwhelmed. But that's a different story. I'll talk about that actually on Sunday in my opening shiur when I deal with Rabbi Aharon Soloveitchik. But anyway, he went to study. On that level, there was no difference. And at that level, they both honored each other. And I'll tell you another story, which you can find on the internet, David Weingarten. Again, these are people I knew quite well, sharing tours. David Weingarten, who ran a tour, the tours arranged travel, that was his business. He gets a call, and he was very big in Mizrahi, and he had big yichus. His wife was the granddaughter of Rav Uziel, the chief rabbi, Sephardic chief rabbi, and he gets a call that Castro is willing to allow Jews out, the communist revolution in Cuba, but the day he's letting them fly out is Yom Kippur. And evidently Weingarten was involved in making the arrangements. As we said, he was a travel agent, ran a travel agency, that's the word I was looking for. And you live in Israel as long as I do, you think in Hebrew, not in English, but and he called the Rav. And the Rav says to David, I'll call me back in 2 hours. And David calls him back in 2 hours, and the Rav tells him, do everything possible, get them out even on Yom Kippur. It turns out that Castro had no evil intention. He didn't realize it was Yom Kippur. When they explained to Castro that it was Yom Kippur, he said, so go a few days later, and there was never a problem. Years later, David Weingarten meets the Rav at a wedding. And he says, Rebbe, why did you tell me to call you back? I should call you back in 2 hours. And the Rav looks at him and says, David, a shaila like that, do you think I can paskin myself? I had to reach Rabbi Aharon Kotler. After I spoke with Rabbi Aharon, then I had my answer ready for you. So that story tells you something. All right, on that level, they were both in a very similar world. But there was, of course, a tremendous difference beyond that. Rabbi Aharon attempted to recreate in America exactly what he had in Kletsk. That was his dream. America is not different. It's nicht anders. It's like the sixth Rebbe of Chabad, if you know the famous story when he arrived in America and he wakes up the next morning and he tells his Ki Chassidim, I'm going to show you America is not different. Rabbi Aharon had the same feeling. The Rav, on the other hand, had a vastly different background. He was raised by a mother, Rebbe Pesha Feinstein Soloveitchik, who I also knew. He was raised by a mother who was a tzaddiket, but very broad and had appreciation for the 20th century, the new world, Western civilization, literature, all that went with it. Part of this she gave to her children. And the Rav, as you know, left Poland, left Warsaw, went to Berlin, and when he arrives in America, he has a PhD from the University of Berlin in philosophy. He had studied mathematics, philosophy. He was very much at home in the Western world. If you knew the Rav intimately, and I'm not the only one to make this point, you read Rabbi Yitzchak Tweski's Hespedim for the Rav, Rabbi Aharon Lichtenstein's descriptions of his father-in-law, totally at home. There was no breach between, no chasm between Gruss and the Western world. And I once described the Rav, I was being interviewed by a very right-wing publication, by its editor, a real brisker. And I said, you want to describe the Rav? A brisker at ease in the Western world. He started dancing with joy. He said, that's perfect. He understood what I was saying. You see, and you can compare him to other Gedolim. For instance, you take the Sridei Yesh. If you know the Sridei Yesh well, and I'm the one, his famous Talmud, the Talmud who did the PhD in the Sridei Yesh, is my Talmud, Mark Rabbi, Dr. Professor Mark Shapiro. Where did he first learn about the Sridei Yesh? In my class in BMT.
We interviewed Rav Shalom Karmi on the Sridei Yesh a couple months ago.
That's my neighbor. Well, you're close to home. So Karmi Horowitz, you talk. Oh, Shalom Karmi, not Karmi Horowitz. Karmi Horowitz, Professor Horowitz is my neighbor, and Shalom Karmi I know too. And the Sridei Yesh was not totally at ease. He had moments where he veered back to Mir, back to Poland, back to Slobodka, and he had moments where he was way beyond the Western world. He wrote things where you could see this man totally at ease, plus in the Western world. The Rav was a brisker in the Western world. And of course, there was a chasm between himself and Rabbi Aharon. And I mean, I know a story, I don't want to mention the name, but it was someone I knew very well. It turns out that his cousin was one of my best friends, and he's not only one of my best friends until today, he's also my Talmud, because I don't repeat all my Shurim are ongoing. So this individual retired in Israel at the age of 65, and he's my age today, do the Cheshbon, and he hasn't missed a Shia in the last 20 years. And this was his cousin. His cousin, the Rav, was very close to the family, and the cousins accepted to Harvard. And the Rav, or Harvard, to the Rav, this was important. And instead, he goes to Lakewood. He's no longer alive, but he went on to learn in Lakewood many years, and the Rav was upset. How will he make a living? The Western world. It turned out he did okay, but the Rav totally at ease, and that's the Rav, and that's his message until today. As you know, in his own family, the Rav has many descendants who are all in Habatzat HaTorah, and you find among them many differences in hashkafa, but that's the way I understand the Rav. That you have a right to go in your own derech, this is the beauty of being a Torah Jew. You open up a Gemara, the first thing you see in the first Mishnah, when can you say Kriyat Shema at night, until what time? 3 different viewpoints. Baruch Hashem, we have many different viewpoints, HaBechira Nitna and Bechira Chavshit, but that to me is how I understood the Rav. And I'll tell you a fallout on what I just said. Was the Rav like Rav Shimshon full Hirsch? It's a very interesting question. You know, in my second volume, my 2 volumes on the Rav, so my second volume, I have 2 talks where the Rav discusses himself from Rav Shimshon full Hirsch. I consider though, I translated from Yiddish into English, I consider that my greatest contribution to scholarship. Again, if you appreciate who Rav Hirsch was, the Rav, and there's no question in those talks, the Rav is not a Hirschian. You can say to the Rav Rebbe, and if we didn't have to go to college, didn't have to live in the Western world, what would you say, Rebbe? We just sit and learn? The Rav would have said, absolutely, just sit and learn. Study the Rav's magnum opus, Ish Halacha. He sounds like Rav Hirsch. Milu etaretz v'kivshucha. To go out, to conquer, to do, to learn. Lachatchila, nothing to do with reality of the civilization in which you're in. This is the divine command. It's very fascinating. I once spoke about that to an audience and was a popular crowd, and the rabbi got so upset. I implied the Rav may be against college. The next week he gave a whole talk, deflating my point of view. But I stick to what I said. It's a contradiction, but that was the Rav. Totally at ease in the Western world, whether Latchatchila like Rav Hirsch or B'diavad, open to interpretation, in my humble opinion.
Would you say that the Rav and Rav Kotler had a personal relationship?
No, there's no question.
Was it beyond communal issues?
No, there's no question there was a personal relationship. There was Kavod Hadadi. And the Rav knew who Rabbi Aharon was, but the Rabbi Aharon knew who the Rav was. That Rabbi Aharon didn't totally agree with the Rav, and the Rav didn't totally agree with Rabbi Aharon, goes without saying. That goes without saying. But there absolutely was a personal relationship there. And the Rav, Rabbi Aharon was ashamed of the Kletzker Yeshiva. And I can tell you, people in the Rav's family, I don't want to mention names, all this was told to me privately, but people who knew the Rav better than anyone because they lived with him 24/7, they said that one of the real people that the Rav had derech eretz for and, with tremendous consideration was Rabbi Aharon Kotler. Doesn't mean they agreed. Now, you have here a question about the drafting of women. So, the RJJ president, Mr. Schick, who was a lawyer, left quite a bit of memoir. Some of it is on the internet. And he tells a story that he claims the person who drove one of the participants discussing what they're going to do about drafting of women, and he sat in on the meeting. Rabbi Aharon Kotler was there, and Rav Sachs, Rav Mendel Sachs was there, could be another gadol or so, and the Rav was there, and they wanted the Rav to come out against drafting of women and issue a statement, and the Rav refused. And when you open up one of the volumes published by the Torah Rav Foundation, edited by Rabbi Natty Helfgott, my student, on this very issue, there's a whole article, a letter from the Rav, and it's very simple. The Rav agreed with them. The Rav wasn't in favor of drafting women. But what the Rav disagreed was not to go public against Israel outside the state of Israel. And there too, you see right away the difference in outlook, the difference in the nuances of their hashkafa. Now, as far as Agudat Yisrael goes, I think you're aware that I recorded 9 hours in the Kollel. It came out in 6 tapes. No one knows what tapes are today, but I still remember reels, and I actually saw like little metal pieces of metal going up into the air that they recorded on in the 1930s. And the Rav began as an Agudist. There's no two ways about it. He was very impressed with the Aguda movement. First of all, in Lithuania, Reb Chaim Isaac Grzhinsky, very impressed with Warsaw, the Gera Rebbe, Mudgets, it was all Aguda. Then he came to Berlin, and he saw Aguda already on a much higher, classy, social level. Rav Hildesheimer, others, well, Agudistim. And then he came to the United States. And without going into great detail, but I can tell you, I'm when you come up with theories, I would say I'm 100% sure I'm correct. Actually, I heard Rabbi Aharon Lichtenstein, Zeichet Tzadik Livracha, said something similar. What happened in America, what happened with Hitler, caused the Rav to shift gears. Because when you go back to the late 30s, there were big demonstrations against Hitler. Actually, my parents participated, Madison Square Garden, etc. And Aguda did not. Shtadlanut. I'm actually publishing a major work about this. It's already finished. This part is finished. It'll be in Rakeffet and Chelek. I consider it the most important work I will have ever published because it's Hashkafa, Halacha, history, and it's a result of a lifetime of learning, scholarship, living, seeing, doing. And Shtadlanut, well, we know where the Shtadlanut got us. Go a step further, and this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Read the Rav, read the Boston Rebbe's memoir. 1943, millions of Jews are being killed. Everyone knows about it. The leaders of American Jewry, the Reform rabbis, did not do a thing. They withheld the information at Roosevelt's request. Finally, the rabbis, the Orthodox rabbis, the Agudas HaRabbanim, which was the power then, the Bergson group, Hillel Kook, Zeichet Tzadik Livracha, what skliyot that man has, Ben Hecht, I can go right up and down the line. They organized the march on the Capitol in Washington 2 days before Yom Kippur, 1943. The Rav participated in the back rows. He was not yet famous. Up front was Reb Eliezer Silver, Reb Yisrael Rosenberg, Reb Meir Berlin, etc. And Roosevelt spat in their face. He didn't even come down to see them. He sent Henry Wallace, and to quote the Rav Maria Rebbe, quote, "You all know how much influence a vice president has in the United States." Interestingly, Rabbi Aharon Kotler did not participate in the march because he felt that Shtadlanut is what counts, not public demonstrations. You can read about this in the volume that came out in Baruch Nathan, the Torah Vodaas graduate who was very involved in Hatzalah work after World War II. You can read about Rabbi Aharon's not participating. Now, that pushed the Rav over the cliff. And from 46 on, he publicly identified with the Mizrahi movement, honorary president, etc. His talks at the Mizrahi conventions will live on as long as Jews walk the face of the earth. Kol Dido Fake, Hamesh Drasha, Joseph Yechav. I have a major piece coming out shortly, Joseph and his brothers in relation to Theodor Herzl and Zionism. It's dedicated to the memory of my Rebbe. He became a Mizrahiite, an activist. And when you look at Mizrahi in Israel today in the year 2022, we have a lot to be proud of. We've came broken in spirit, no background, not knowing the way of the land. Remember, it took 200 years to develop a Yiddishkeit in America that could thrive and survive. And look what we have today. Yeshiva, Yeshivat Gedolat, Yeshivat Hesda, Ulpanat, Michlalot, a whole world of religious Zionism. And not only that, if you saw the latest Mizrahi magazine, it's a whole issue devoted to Datiyim and Charedim. And a guy named Rakeffet is interviewed how should be our relationship with the Charedim. And I invite you to see what I wrote, what I said. And this goes back to the Rav, activism. And if you ask me what was the Makkah B'Patish, the straw that broke the camel's back, how Roosevelt spat in their face in 1943. Hashem Yirachem. Today, Gorbachev died. That's the big news at this moment in time. And the man has a lot of zkuyot. There are at least 2 million Jews in the world today who know they're Jewish and act Jewish and live Jewish. Many of them, Shemet Torah mitzvah. It's because of Gorbachev. But give the credit to Ronald Reagan. You follow me? Yes. The Jews demonstrated, yelled, shouted. Reagan, the evil empire, 250,000 Jews outside yelling and shouting right before Gorbachev comes to Washington. And Reagan says, I can't do anything for you till I satisfy those millions of people who are yelling and shouting outside. That's the ultimate win of activism. So that's the Rav as I understand him.
Unfortunately, our time is now up. And again, this is just a little bit of a taste from Rabbi Rakeffet. Rabbi Rakeffet, thank you so much for your time this morning. I know it's very valuable and appreciate it very much. Thank you. Amen. Amen. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.